Chapter 1. The First 10 Seconds. People decide whether to respect you in the first 10 seconds you speak. Not after your third point, not after your explanation, not after you clarify what you meant. The first 10 seconds. And most people lose authority before they finish their first sentence. Not because they're incompetent, not because they lack intelligence, but because they break one rule leaders never break. I won't tell you the rule yet, but by the end of this audiobook, you'll never violate it again. Here's what's happening in those first seconds. Before anyone evaluates your logic, before they analyze your idea, before they consciously decide whether they agree with you, their brain makes a faster decision. Safe or unsafe, certain or unsure, leader or follower. This is not dramatic theory, it's biological reality. The human brain is wired for rapid judgment. Within moments of hearing your voice, people form what psychologists call a thin slice impression, a snap assessment of competence, confidence, and dominance. You think they're judging your idea. They're judging your delivery, your pace, your tone, your hesitation, your need for approval hidden inside casual phrases. And once that impression forms, everything you say afterward is filtered through it. If you sound unsure, your idea sounds weak. If you sound rushed, your plan feels unstable. If you sound apologetic, your leadership evaporates. Authority is decided before logic enters the room. This is where most intelligent people sabotage themselves. They believe clarity will save them. They believe more explanation will convince. They believe passion will compensate for nervousness. It won't. Because leadership is not evaluated intellectually first, it is evaluated emotionally first. Your voice is not just sound, it is a signal of stability, a signal of control, a signal of whether you can be trusted under pressure. Let me introduce you to someone. His name is Daniel. Daniel is competent, prepared, smart. He works in a mid-level management role inside a fast-growing company. He knows his material, he works harder than most people around him, but every time he walks into a meeting with senior leadership, something happens. He starts strong, then he speeds up. He adds extra details no one asked for. He softens conclusions with, "I think," and "maybe we could." He fills silence before anyone has a chance to respond. And without realizing it, he gives the room a message he never intended to send. "I'm not fully certain." No one says it out loud, no one criticizes him directly, but promotions pass him by. Bigger decisions go to someone else, the quieter executive, the one who speaks less. Daniel thinks the issue is visibility. It isn't. It's the first 10 seconds. The first 10 seconds decide whether the room leans in or tunes out. And Daniel is about to get one more opportunity. One high-stakes presentation in front of the executive board, a moment that could change his trajectory. He doesn't know it yet, but what happens in his first 10 seconds will determine everything, and it will come down to one rule, a rule most people violate every single day without noticing. In the next chapter, we're going to expose the invisible judgment happening every time you open your mouth, because once you see it, you can never unsee it, and once you control it, rooms start changing. Chapter 2. The Invisible Judgment. Before people understand you, they feel you. That's the invisible judgment. You walk into a room. You begin to speak. And within seconds, something silent and automatic happens inside the minds of everyone listening. They are not analyzing your strategy. They are not evaluating your intelligence. They are scanning for signals. Is this person stable? Is this person certain? Is this person dominant or deferential? This happens faster than conscious thought. Researchers studying what's known as thin slice judgments discovered something unsettling. Human beings form reliable impressions about confidence and competence within seconds of exposure, sometimes just from a brief audio clip, No full conversation, no detailed explanation, just tone, pacing, and vocal energy. And those impressions tend to stick. That means your authority is often decided before your argument even begins. Tone is judged before content. A steady voice signals emotional control. A rushed voice signals anxiety. A rising tone at the end of statements signals uncertainty. A soft, trailing finish signals doubt. You may believe your message is strong, but if your tone contradicts it, the tone wins. Always. There's a reason for this. At a biological level, the human brain is wired to detect social dominance and stability. Long before modern workplaces existed, survival depended on quickly identifying who was confident, who was fearful, who could lead, and who might panic under pressure. Your brain still runs that ancient software. When someone speaks calmly and deliberately, the nervous system of the listener relaxes. Calm signals control. Control signals safety, and safety increases trust. When someone speaks quickly with vocal tension or emotional leakage, the opposite happens. The listener's brain detects instability, not consciously, instinctively. And instability reduces perceived authority. This is social dominance psychology in action. Dominance is not aggression, it is not loudness, it is not intimidation. Dominance in communication is perceived emotional stability. The person who appears least reactive appears most powerful. This is why the loudest person in the room is rarely the most respected. It's also why Daniel keeps losing rooms without understanding why. In meetings, he believes he is being thorough, helpful, engaged. But when a senior executive asks him a question, he answers immediately, too quickly. His voice lifts slightly at the end of strong statements. He adds extra context before anyone requests it. Subtle signals, but signals nonetheless. The room feels it before it processes it. He is leaking authority. Not because his ideas are weak, because his tone suggests he needs validation. And validation seeking is the opposite of dominance. Here's the uncomfortable truth. You may think you're communicating confidence, but if your tone says, "Do you agree with me?" instead of, "Here's the direction," people feel the difference instantly. Authority is not declared, it is detected. And right now, whether you realize it or not, you are either reinforcing authority with every sentence, or you're leaking it. In the next chapter, we're going to expose the reflex that causes intelligent people to sabotage their own presence. It's subtle, automatic, and almost everyone does it. Once you see it, you'll recognize it in yourself within hours. And when you do, you'll understand exactly where your authority has been slipping away.
Chapter 3. The Approval Reflex. Intelligent people don't sound weak because they lack knowledge. They sound weak because they crave approval. Not openly, not consciously, but subtly, reflexively, automatically. This is the approval reflex. It shows up in small phrases. I just think. Maybe we could. I'm not sure, but. Does that make sense? On the surface, these phrases sound polite, cooperative, harmless. But underneath them is a hidden message. Please validate me. Over-explaining is rarely about clarity. It's about protection. When you over-explain, you are not adding value. You are cushioning yourself against possible rejection. You are trying to control how others perceive you. You are trying to prevent disagreement before it even happens. And in doing so, you signal insecurity. Here's the psychology behind it. Human beings are wired for belonging. Social rejection historically meant danger. Isolation meant vulnerability. So the brain developed a powerful instinct: soften yourself to avoid conflict. That instinct still runs inside you. In a modern meeting room, your nervous system reacts as if disagreement is a threat. So instead of delivering a clean decision, you wrap it in padding. You add context. You apologize for the inconvenience. You justify your reasoning before anyone questions it. You fill the silence, because silence feels risky. Silence creates space for judgment, and judgment feels dangerous. So you talk. You talk past the point. You talk around the conclusion. You talk to reduce discomfort. But every extra sentence drains authority. I learned this the hard way. Years ago, I was presenting an idea to a room of senior professionals. I had prepared thoroughly, slides polished, data memorized, arguments structured. When I began speaking, I felt strong. Then, someone interrupted with a simple question. Why should we prioritize this now? It was a fair question. But instead of answering directly, I panicked internally. My mind raced. What if they think I haven't thought this through? What if they challenge the numbers? What if I lose credibility? So I explained, and explained, and explained. I talked about timelines, market conditions, internal constraints, risk mitigation, competitive positioning, historical performance. 3 minutes later, I had buried my own idea. The person who asked the question leaned back and said calmly, "So what's the actual recommendation?" In trying to avoid judgment, I created doubt. The room didn't question my intelligence, they questioned my certainty. That moment was painful, but it revealed something critical. Over-explaining is not a sign of intelligence, it is a sign of fear. Fear of silence, fear of disagreement, fear of being wrong in public. And here's the irony. The more you try to protect yourself with words, the less protected you become. Because leaders don't over-explain. Leaders conclude. They say, "We prioritize this now because it increases retention by 18%. We move forward." Then they stop. Silence follows. And in that silence, authority solidifies. Most people can't handle that silence, so they fill it. That is the approval reflex in action. Daniel does this constantly. When his manager asks for an update, he doesn't say, "We're at 80%, final delivery Friday." He says, "We're about 80% done, but there were a few minor delays and we're adjusting some things, and I just want to make sure expectations are aligned." He is believing he's being responsible, but the room hears hesitation. He is not lacking skill. He is leaking authority through approval-seeking speech. And unless that reflex is broken, no amount of knowledge will fix it. In the next chapter, we'll examine how intelligent professionals accidentally sabotage themselves in high-stakes rooms, even when their ideas are superior. Because the problem isn't competence, it's control. Chapter 4. When Smart People Sabotage Themselves. Smart people don't lose rooms because they lack ideas. They lose rooms because they overload them. Cognitive overload is subtle. It doesn't feel like weakness when you're speaking. It feels like thoroughness. It feels responsible. It feels intelligent. But to the listener, it feels heavy. The human brain can only process a limited amount of information at once. When you stack too many details, too many caveats, too many supporting arguments, something predictable happens. Attention drops, confidence drops, perceived competence drops. There's research on this. Studies in communication psychology show that when information becomes overly dense, listeners begin to equate complexity with uncertainty, not because complexity is inherently weak, but because clarity signals mastery. The clearer the message, the more competent the speaker appears. The more cluttered the message, the more unstable the speaker appears. This is the paradox intelligent people struggle with. They know more, so they say more, and in saying more, they dilute the impact of what matters. Let's go back to Daniel. He's sitting in a quarterly strategy meeting, senior leadership at the table, a presentation he's been preparing for weeks. He begins well. Our customer retention dropped 6% last quarter. Clear? Strong. Then the slide changes. But there were multiple contributing factors: seasonality, onboarding friction, pricing resistance in 2 verticals, and some early churn from enterprise accounts. We've also noticed shifts in engagement metrics across segments, which could be tied to recent product updates. He keeps going. He's trying to show he understands the full picture. He wants them to see he's done the analysis. He wants to preempt criticism. But as he speaks, something shifts in the room. One executive glances at their phone, another leans back. A third interrupts. So what's the recommendation? Daniel hesitates. Because in all the explaining, he buried the conclusion. He scrolls back through his slides, trying to restate the main point. Now his voice speeds up, his tone tightens, he adds even more context. The room is gone. Not because he was wrong, not because he lacked preparation, because he sabotaged himself with overload. High competence requires compression. When you understand something deeply, you should be able to state it simply. If you can't state it simply, the room assumes you don't fully own it. That assumption may be unfair, but perception decides authority. Daniel walks out of that meeting frustrated. He knows he had the strongest analysis. He knows his plan was solid. But the promotion conversation later that month goes to someone else, someone who speaks in short conclusions. We need to shift onboarding priority. It's costing us retention. That was it. Fewer words, strong landing, silence. The executive room trusts clarity more than complexity. And until Daniel learns to compress his intelligence into decisive communication, he will continue to lose rooms he deserves to win. In the next chapter, we're going to examine what's happening in the brain during those moments and why emotional stability determines authority faster than intelligence ever will. Because this isn't just psychology, it's biology. Chapter 5. The brain reacts before it understands. Before someone understands your words, their brain has already reacted to you. Not thoughtfully, not logically, biologically. Deep inside the brain sits a small almond-shaped structure called the amygdala. Its job is simple: detect threat. It scans tone, facial tension, pace, and vocal intensity long before the rational mind begins analyzing content. This system evolved for survival. Thousands of years ago, you didn't have time to debate whether someone approaching you was dangerous. You reacted first, thought later. That ancient wiring is still active in every meeting room, every negotiation, every presentation. When you speak, the amygdala of the listener asks one silent question: is this person stable? Tone answers that question faster than words ever could. A rushed voice signals tension. A shaky tone signals anxiety. A sharp spike in volume signals volatility. Even if your message is positive, the nervous system of the listener may register instability, and instability reduces authority. On the other hand, a calm, steady, grounded tone sends a different signal. No threat detected, no chaos detected, no emotional unpredictability. Calm equals safety. Safety builds trust, and trust builds dominance. Dominance in communication is not aggression. It is perceived control. The person who appears least emotionally reactive appears most powerful. This is why a leader who stays calm during a crisis immediately commands attention. Imagine 2 executives announcing a sudden market downturn. The first speaks quickly, voice tight, energy elevated. We're facing challenges, but we're working through solutions, and there are multiple factors, and we're assessing next steps. The second speaks slower, even tone, controlled breathing. Revenue declined 8%. Here's our response: cost adjustment, client retention focus. Execution begins today. Which one feels in command? The message may be similar. The reaction is not. The amygdala responds to steadiness as strength. This is also why shouting rarely builds respect. Shouting signals emotional loss of control. Emotional loss of control signals instability. Instability lowers dominance perception. Calm does the opposite. Calm under pressure signals that your internal state is not easily shaken, that you can assess before reacting, that you are not ruled by fear. And the human brain is wired to follow the person who appears least afraid. Let's return to Daniel. During a tense meeting, a senior leader challenges his numbers. His heart rate spikes, his breathing shortens. He responds immediately, voice slightly higher, slightly faster. He doesn't notice it, but the room does. The shift is subtle, yet powerful. The moment his tone tightens, his perceived authority drops. Not because he's wrong, because his biology is visible through his voice. If Daniel had paused, slowed, lowered his tone, breathed, the same words would land differently. Because calm equals dominance. Not dominance through intimidation, dominance through regulation. When your nervous system stays regulated, you project control. When you project control, others relax. When others relax, they listen. Leadership begins in the nervous system, before logic, before strategy, before persuasion. In the next chapter, we'll examine how elite institutions train this biological control deliberately, and why silence is often more powerful than confidence itself. Because what you're building is not performance, it's command. Chapter 6: Harvard, FBI, and Elite Communication Training. Elite communication is not accidental. It is trained. At the highest levels, negotiation rooms at Harvard, hostage situations handled by the FBI, communication is engineered around one principle: stability under stress. At Harvard's program on negotiation, one of the first lessons taught is pacing. Not persuasion, not dominance. Pacing. Negotiators are trained to slow conversations down intentionally. When tension rises, they reduce speed. When emotions spike, they soften tone. When the other side becomes aggressive, they become measured. Why? Because the person who controls tempo controls the frame. Speed is contagious. Anxiety spreads. Emotional escalation multiplies. But calm spreads too. When a negotiator lowers their voice and slows their cadence, the room adjusts around them. The emotional climate stabilizes. This is not charisma. It is nervous system regulation as strategy. Now consider the FBI's hostage negotiation unit. In high-risk scenarios, negotiators are trained to use what is often called the calm baseline voice. It is deliberate, even, low, controlled. No sharp spikes, no dramatic urgency, no emotional leakage. Even when the situation is chaotic, because panic amplifies panic. The negotiator's job is not to overpower the hostage taker, it is to regulate the environment. A calm voice signals, "I am not threatened." And when the brain detects that the other person is not threatened, it begins to lower its own defenses. Stability creates influence. This is why elite communicators rarely rush their words. They don't compete for oxygen in the room. They allow space. They tolerate silence. Daniel has never been trained this way. In his world, meetings move fast. Questions come quickly. Interruptions are common. He believes that responding immediately proves competence. But elite training teaches the opposite. A measured pause before responding signals processing power. A slower tone signals internal control. When Daniel is challenged, he speaks fast to prove certainty. An FBI negotiator would do something different. They would pause, lower the tone slightly, and respond in fewer words than expected. That pattern interrupts tension instead of feeding it. This is not about sounding robotic, it's about sounding unshakable. And unshakable is magnetic. In elite environments, stability under stress becomes the deciding factor in who leads. When chaos rises, the calmest voice becomes the anchor. People follow anchors, not noise. Here is the paradox most intelligent professionals miss. Confidence is loud. Authority is steady. Confidence tries to convince. Authority assumes. Confidence fills silence. Authority uses it. Which brings us to the next layer. Silence is stronger than confidence, because silence signals that you are comfortable without approval. And comfort without approval is the foundation of command. In the next chapter, we're going to break down why silence increases perceived intelligence, perceived power, and perceived control, and why most people sabotage themselves the moment the room becomes quiet. Because the space between your words may matter more than the words themselves.
Chapter 7. The Scarcity Principle of Words. Power is compressed. Weakness is expanded. When you study high-authority environments, military briefings, surgical teams, air traffic control, you notice something immediately. They do not waste words. In military communication, brevity is doctrine. Orders are short, clear, direct. Hold position. Advance. Abort. Execute. There is no decorative language, no emotional cushioning, no over-explaining. Because in high-stakes environments, excess words create friction. Friction creates confusion. Confusion destroys execution. Now apply that to leadership communication. Most professionals believe that speaking more increases credibility. They add context, justification, background reasoning, and emotional reassurance. But psychologically, something else happens. Scarcity increases perceived value. This principle exists in economics. It exists in marketing. It exists in human attention. And it exists in speech. When someone speaks rarely, people lean in. When someone speaks constantly, people tune out. Your words gain weight when they are not constantly available. Think about the quiet executive in the room, the one who doesn't interrupt, the one who listens more than they speak. When they finally say something, the room shifts. Not because they are louder, because they are scarce. Scarcity creates anticipation. Anticipation increases impact. Daniel begins to experiment with this. In a product meeting, the team debates strategy for 20 minutes. Normally, he would jump in repeatedly, clarifying, correcting, contributing. This time, he waits. He takes notes. He watches patterns. He listens for repetition. When the conversation begins circling, he speaks once. We're solving the wrong constraint. Onboarding friction is the leverage point. Then he stops.
No paragraph. No defensive explanation. No slide deck. Silence follows. The room processes. Someone asks, why onboarding? Now he answers. Briefly. Because retention loss starts in week 1. Fix that, churn drops. Silence again. The dynamic shifts. Instead of chasing attention, he is now directing it. This is the scarcity principle of words. Reduction increases weight. There is a discipline required here. You must resist the urge to fill space. You must tolerate the discomfort of not elaborating immediately. You must trust that clarity does not require decoration. Military communication teaches this because lives depend on precision. Leadership communication demands it because perception depends on precision. The more compressed your message, the more authority it carries. Long explanations signal doubt. Short conclusions signal ownership. But compression does not mean oversimplification. It means extracting the core, the essence, the decisive point, and then stopping. In the next chapter, we will examine the psychology of silence itself, why the moment after you finish speaking is often more powerful than the sentence you delivered, because saying less is only half the discipline. Holding the silence is the other half.
Chapter 8. Strip 25% of your language. Most people don't need better ideas. They need better editing. If you want to increase authority immediately, remove 25% of your words. Not by speaking slower, not by lowering your voice, by cutting language. There is a tactical way to do this. Step 1. Eliminate verbal padding. Phrases like I think, just to clarify, kind of, basically, I mean, what I'm trying to say is. These are linguistic cushions. They soften statements before they even land. When you say, I think we should adjust pricing, you frame the statement as tentative. When you say, we should adjust pricing, you frame it as direction. The content is identical. The authority is not. Step 2. Remove defensive pre-justification. Weak communicators anticipate disagreement before it happens. So this might not be perfect, but I could be wrong, but this may sound crazy, but each of these phrases signals insecurity. Strong communicators allow their ideas to stand without apology. Step 3. Convert paragraphs into conclusions. Instead of building toward the point slowly, lead with it. Weak version. So after reviewing the engagement metrics and looking at the retention numbers over the last quarter, it seems like onboarding might be contributing more than we initially thought. Compressed version. Onboarding is driving churn. Then explain only if asked. Daniel decides to apply this rule. In his next team meeting, he trims his slides, cuts 3 explanatory charts, removes disclaimers. He speaks. Customer churn is tied to onboarding friction. He stops. It's cleaner, shorter, stronger.
But something is off. His tone is sharp, clipped, slightly defensive. The words are compressed. The delivery is tense. The room feels it. One colleague responds cautiously, "Okay, can you expand on that?" Daniel feels irritation rise. He thought shorter would equal stronger, but brevity without calm becomes aggression. Compression requires control. If your tone tightens, your shorter sentence sounds confrontational instead of decisive. If your face hardens, your concise statement sounds dismissive instead of clear. Authority is not just fewer words, it is regulated delivery. Daniel had removed 25% of his language. He had not removed 25% of his internal anxiety, and anxiety leaks through tone. This is the deeper layer most people miss. Editing language is mechanical. Editing your emotional state is biological. When both align, short sentences delivered with steady tone, perception shifts dramatically. You sound certain, grounded, in control. In the next chapter, we will break down how silence amplifies compressed language and why holding eye contact after a short statement multiplies its impact. Because saying less is powerful, but saying less and holding steady is command.
Chapter 9. Why silence makes people nervous. Silence is not empty. It is pressure. The moment you stop speaking, something begins happening inside the other person's mind. An internal monologue activates. Did that land? Are they done? Am I supposed to respond? Did I miss something? Silence forces processing, and processing creates tension. Human beings are socially wired to reduce tension quickly.
In conversation, we smooth over gaps, we fill pauses, we rescue awkwardness. That reflex feels polite, but psychologically it weakens leverage. Research in social discomfort psychology shows that social gaps longer than a few seconds elevate internal anxiety. The brain interprets silence as uncertainty, and uncertainty feels unstable. Most people rush to eliminate that instability. They laugh, they over-explain, they soften their statement, they add, "Does that make sense?" The silence disappears. So does the authority. Because the person who tolerates silence appears more comfortable than the person who breaks it. And comfort under tension signals dominance. This is why silence makes people nervous. It removes the buffer. When you state something clearly and stop, you force the other person to sit with it. There is no distraction, no extra language to dilute the message, just the truth. Daniel experiences this in a performance review conversation. His manager says, "I'm not sure your strategic influence is where it needs to be yet." Normally, Daniel would respond immediately, "Well, I've been leading the retention initiative, and I've presented in 3 cross-functional meetings, and I've—" But this time, he pauses. He inhales slowly. He says evenly, "What specifically feels missing?" Then, silence. His manager shifts in the chair. The air thickens slightly, because the silence redirects pressure. Instead of Daniel defending himself, the manager now has to clarify. "Well, I think it's more about executive presence in larger rooms." Daniel nods. Silence again. The manager continues speaking, expanding, explaining, revealing more detail than he initially intended. Silence exposed the real issue. Silence does that. It pulls information forward. It also reveals insecurity. In negotiations, when one party names a number and stops talking, the other side feels immediate pressure to respond. The one who speaks first after the silence often concedes ground, because silence amplifies discomfort, and discomfort seeks relief. Most professionals sabotage themselves by relieving the other person's discomfort too quickly. They soften strong statements. They negotiate against themselves. They dilute decisive points. All because silence feels awkward. But awkwardness is not danger. It is leverage. When you hold silence after a concise statement, you communicate 3 things. I stand by what I said. I am not afraid of your reaction. I do not need to chase approval. That posture changes dynamics instantly. The internal monologue of the listener grows louder during silence, and that monologue often works in your favor. They begin justifying your point for you. They begin searching for agreement. They begin revealing information. Silence becomes an amplifier. In the next chapter, we'll explore how to use silence intentionally, not passively, and how long you should actually hold it before it shifts from power to awkwardness. Because silence is not absence. It is controlled tension. Chapter 10. The Negotiation Weapon. Silence is not passive. It is a weapon. Used correctly, it shifts power without raising your voice. Consider a startup founder pitching to investors. She presents her numbers clearly: growth rate, revenue trajectory, burn rate. Then she states the ask. We're raising $3 million for 18% equity. And she stops. No justification, no nervous laughter, no defensive explanation. The investors look at each other. One adjusts his glasses, another flips through the deck again. The silence stretches. 5 seconds, 7 seconds, 10. Inside her body, adrenaline rises. The urge to speak again grows stronger. Maybe she should explain the valuation. Maybe she should soften the percentage. Maybe she should add more projections. But she holds. Finally, one investor says, "Walk us through how you landed on that valuation." Notice what happened. They did not reject the number, they engaged it. If she had rushed to fill the silence, we're flexible on equity, of course, and we can discuss structure, they would have negotiated against herself before they even responded. Silence forced them to move first. Now consider a job interview. The hiring director asks, "What salary range are you expecting?" Most candidates panic here. They ramble. "Well, I'm open, I'm flexible, it depends on the full package." Or worse, they state a number and then immediately justify it. "I'm looking for around 120,000, but I'm flexible because I know the market is competitive and I value the opportunity." Every extra word reduces leverage. A stronger version sounds like this: "I'm targeting 120,000. Silence. The interviewer nods slowly. Okay. Silence works because it shifts discomfort across the table. The person who speaks first after a decisive statement often gives away power. Daniel decides to test this. He's in a cross-functional meeting discussing resource allocation. Marketing wants additional budget. Product wants engineering hours. Daniel presents his case. If we don't prioritize onboarding improvements this quarter, churn will increase. He finishes and stops. The room goes quiet. His heart pounds. The silence feels heavier than expected. Someone clears their throat. He fights the urge to add, "just my opinion," or "we can explore alternatives." He stays still. The VP leans forward. What would it take to implement onboarding changes in 30 days? Daniel feels the shift. For the first time, the room moved toward his position without him chasing it. But then something happens. Another executive pushes back. That feels aggressive. Are we sure we're overreacting? The tension spikes. The silence returns. This time, it feels sharper, riskier. Daniel holds it. 3 seconds. 4. 5. The discomfort intensifies. And in that stretch of quiet, the room waits to see whether he will retreat or stand still. The next move will define how they see him. And silence right now is doing more work than words ever could. In the next chapter, we'll examine exactly how long to hold silence before it becomes self-sabotage, and how to combine eye contact and posture to multiply its effect. Because silence is powerful, but uncontrolled silence can expose you instead of empower you. Chapter 11. Calm is power. Volume is not power. Control is power. There is a difference. When pressure rises, most people instinctively increase intensity. Their voice becomes louder, faster, sharper. They believe energy equals authority. But in high-stakes environments, the opposite is true. Loud signals emotional activation. Steady signals emotional control. And control wins rooms. Imagine a company facing a sudden crisis. Revenue drops, investors are anxious, employees are uncertain. 2 CEOs address their teams. The first steps on stage with force. "We are not going to let this defeat us. We're going to push harder, move faster, and outwork everyone." The room claps, the energy spikes. But beneath the intensity, something subtle leaks through, urgency mixed with strain. Now imagine the second CEO. She walks out slowly, shoulders relaxed, voice even. "Revenue declined. Here's what we're doing. 3 priorities, clear execution. We'll update weekly. No theatrics, no emotional spikes, just clarity." The room feels different. Breathing slows, anxiety drops, attention sharpens. Why? Because the nervous system mirrors leadership tone. When a leader sounds reactive, the team feels reactive. When a leader sounds steady, the team stabilizes. Calm communicates something deeper than confidence. It communicates capacity. Capacity to absorb pressure. Capacity to think clearly. Capacity to lead without panic. This is why executives who remain composed during criticism gain more respect than those who defend loudly. If someone challenges you and you respond with heightened volume, your biology betrays you. It signals threat. And when you appear threatened, you appear less dominant. Dominance is not about overpowering others.
It is about remaining unmoved. Daniel remembers the silence in the previous meeting, the pushback, the tension. In earlier months, he would have defended himself immediately. This isn't aggressive. The data clearly shows. Voice rising slightly, pace increasing. Instead, he lowers his tone. We're reacting to churn trends, not guessing. Even, controlled. He does not rush to prove himself. He does not escalate. He does not match the intensity of the objection. The dynamic shifts. The executive who challenged him slows down. Okay, walk us through the timeline. Calm redirected the room. Here is the truth most professionals resist. The louder you become under pressure, the smaller you appear. The steadier you remain, the larger you feel. Because calm under stress signals internal stability, and stability attracts authority. In the next chapter, we'll explore how to train this steadiness intentionally, not through personality change, but through physiological control of breath and pacing. Because calm is not a trait, it is a skill. And once mastered, it changes how every room responds to you. Chapter 12. The 60-second tone reset. Calm is not personality. It is physiology. If your tone shifts under pressure, it is not because you are weak. It is because your nervous system is activated. Heart rate rises, breathing shortens, vocal cords tighten, and tight vocal cords produce thin, strained sound. You cannot think your way into a calm voice. You must breathe your way into it. This is where the 60-second tone reset comes in. It is simple, invisible, powerful. Step 1. Inhale slowly through your nose for 4 seconds. Step 2. Hold for 4 seconds. Step 3. Exhale slowly for 6 seconds. Longer exhales activate the parasympathetic nervous system, the body's calming response. Do this 5 times. You have just lowered your heart rate. Now, step 2. Lower your speaking baseline. Most people speak from the upper chest when anxious. This creates a higher pitch and faster delivery. Instead, speak on the exhale. Take a breath. Begin your sentence as you release it slowly. This forces your pace to slow naturally. Step 3. Reduce sentence length. When adrenaline is high, people stack clauses. They rush. They accelerate. Short sentences anchor tone. Here's the issue. Here's the decision. Here's the next step. Tone follows structure. Daniel begins practicing this before meetings. Not dramatically, not visibly. While others set up slides, he inhales slowly, holds, exhales longer than feels natural. His shoulders drop slightly. When the meeting begins, a question comes quickly. Normally, he would answer instantly. Instead, he inhales once, then speaks. Churn is concentrated in week 1. Even tone, lower pitch, slower pace. No rush, no spike. Something subtle changes. Interruptions decrease. People wait until he finishes. He notices something unexpected. The room feels quieter when he speaks. Not because he is louder, because he is steadier.
Later, during a tense exchange, an executive challenges his forecast. Daniel feels the familiar adrenaline. He wants to defend quickly. Instead, he pauses for a single breath. Exhale. Our forecast is conservative. Here's why. No strain in his voice, no urgency in his tone. The executive nods. The difference is small on the surface, but internally it is massive. He is no longer reacting, he is responding. This is the shift from emotional leakage to emotional control. The 60-second reset does not eliminate nerves, it regulates them. And regulated nerves produce regulated tone. When your tone remains steady under challenge, your perceived authority increases instantly. People may not consciously notice why, but their nervous system does. In the next chapter, we'll explore the final layer of vocal control, pace manipulation, and how slowing down strategically can make you sound more intelligent without changing a single word. Because authority is rarely about what you say. It is about how your biology delivers it. Chapter 13. Overcorrection into Arrogance. When people first learn to compress language, hold silence, and control tone, something predictable happens. They swing too far. They move from approval-seeking to cold, from over-explaining to dismissive, from reactive to rigid. This is micro-arrogance. It's subtle, often unintentional, but it erodes influence just as quickly as weakness does. Micro-arrogance shows up in small ways. A shortened reply that sounds clipped instead of calm. A pause that feels like judgment instead of presence. A refusal to elaborate that feels like superiority instead of clarity. Authority without warmth becomes distance, and distance reduces trust. Remember, leadership communication is not about intimidation. It is about stability plus accessibility. If people feel small around you, they stop contributing. If they feel dismissed, they disengage. If they sense ego instead of grounded control, resistance grows quietly. This is the cold authority problem. The leader who mastered silence but forgot empathy. The executive who speaks concisely but never acknowledges others. The manager who maintains steady tone but never softens it. Confidence invites. Arrogance repels. The difference is often a single sentence. Compare, "That's incorrect," versus "That's not aligned with the data." Same clarity, different energy. Or "We're doing it this way," versus "We're moving forward with this approach." One sounds authoritarian, the other sounds decisive but inclusive. Micro-arrogance creeps in when you prioritize dominance over connection. Daniel experiences this after his recent improvements. He's surer now, calmer, more controlled. In a brainstorming session, a junior team member proposes an idea that Daniel believes won't work. He responds evenly, "That won't solve the core issue." Silence. Technically correct. Tonally steady, but something feels off. The junior employee withdraws, stops contributing. After the meeting, a colleague pulls Daniel aside. "You're sounding stronger lately, but sometimes it feels like you've already decided." That lands. Daniel realizes he eliminated insecurity, but also eliminated visible openness. Authority must include psychological safety. True command is firm without being closed. It is steady without being cold. It is decisive without shutting down dialogue. The most powerful leaders combine calm control with subtle warmth. A slight nod while listening. A measured acknowledgement. That's a valid angle. Micro-warmth prevents micro-arrogance. In the next chapter, we'll explore how to balance firmness with approachability, and how a single adjustment in phrasing can preserve authority while increasing influence. Because the goal is not to sound intimidating. The goal is to sound unshakable and human.
Chapter 14. Authority without warmth is fragile. Authority without warmth feels strong, but it breaks under pressure. Social trust operates like calibration. People are constantly measuring two things when you speak. Are you competent? Are you safe? Competence builds respect. Safety builds trust. If you demonstrate competence without safety, people comply temporarily, but they do not align long-term. And alignment determines promotion. There was a senior manager in Daniel's company named Marcus. Brilliant strategist, sharp communicator, extremely concise. When Marcus spoke, rooms went quiet. He rarely smiled, rarely acknowledged input, rarely elaborated. He was respected, but he wasn't trusted. When cross-functional projects required collaboration, teams hesitated to involve him early. Feedback flowed around him instead of through him. He projected authority, but not accessibility. In performance reviews, executives described him as strong but difficult to read. That phrase is dangerous. Difficult to read means psychologically distant, and distance creates fragility. Because the moment pressure increases, a missed deadline, a failed initiative, a strategic disagreement, people feel less inclined to defend someone they don't feel connected to. Authority without warmth cracks in moments of stress. Marcus learned this the hard way. A promotion opportunity opened at the executive level. His metrics were strong, his presentations were sharp, his results were measurable. But the board selected someone else. Someone slightly less technically impressive, but consistently described as steady and easy to work with. That phrase carries weight. Steady signals competence. Easy to work with signals trust. Marcus had optimized for power perception. He neglected relational capital. Daniel watches this unfold carefully. He recognizes something uncomfortable. He was beginning to drift toward Marcus's style.
Short answers, minimal acknowledgement, reduced emotional expression. He had eliminated over-explaining, but he risked eliminating connection. So he begins adjusting subtly. When someone speaks, he nods once. When he disagrees, he says, "I see the angle. Here's the concern." When he decides, he adds, "We'll move forward with this." Not longer speeches, not excessive warmth, just calibrated acknowledgement. Social trust grows through small signals. Micro-warmth preserves authority. Without it, authority becomes brittle, and brittle authority fails under scrutiny. Because leadership is not tested in calm meetings. It is tested in boardrooms, high-stakes environments, public accountability, visible pressure. And that is where we're heading next, the boardroom test, where tone, silence, warmth, and decisiveness collide under real pressure. In the next section, we'll place Daniel into a room where one mistake could define his trajectory, and where authority without emotional calibration will not survive. Because learning principles is one thing, applying them under fire is another. Chapter 15. When emotion hijacks your voice. You don't lose authority because you lack skill. You lose it because stress hijacks your biology. When you are challenged publicly, interrupted sharply, or questioned in front of senior leaders, your body reacts before your mind does. Cortisol spikes, adrenaline rises, your field of vision narrows slightly, your hearing sharpens, your breathing becomes shallow. This is the stress response. It evolved to help you survive physical threats. But in modern rooms, it activates during social threat. A critical comment, a skeptical look, a dismissive interruption. Your nervous system does not distinguish between a predator and public embarrassment. It prepares to fight or flee. And that response leaks through your voice. Pitch rises, pace increases, volume sharpens. You may not feel it consciously, but others hear it instantly. Stress narrows thinking too. When cortisol floods the system, cognitive flexibility drops. You become more rigid, more defensive, less creative. This is why intelligent people sometimes sound least intelligent when pressured. Their biology has taken control. Daniel experiences this during a high-stakes presentation to the executive committee. He has prepared thoroughly, slides are clean, data is solid. Midway through his presentation, a senior board member interrupts. "I'm not convinced this is the right strategic focus." The room goes still. Daniel feels it immediately. Heat rises in his chest, his jaw tightens, his mind races. They don't get it. This is unfair. I need to defend this now. He begins responding quickly. The data clearly shows that his voice is sharper than he intends. The board member leans back. The temperature in the room shifts. In that moment, Daniel is not thinking strategically. He is protecting himself. And protection sounds defensive. Later that evening, he replays it in his head. He knows the numbers were correct, but he also knows his tone changed. That shift mattered. Here is the vulnerability most professionals avoid admitting. We want to look composed, but inside we often feel exposed. And when we feel exposed, our voice betrays us. True authority requires emotional regulation under visible challenge, not suppression, regulation. Suppression pushes emotion down while it leaks sideways through sarcasm, sharpness, or passive aggression. Regulation acknowledges the stress response and slows it. If Daniel had paused, taken one breath, lowered his tone intentionally, and said, "Tell me what concerns you most," the entire interaction would have shifted. Instead of reacting to threat, he would have redirected it. Stress narrowing is real, but it can be widened again with deliberate control. In the next chapter, we'll examine the precise moment when emotional control separates leaders from managers and how to slow down your internal reaction before it reaches your voice. Because under fire, your words matter less than your stability, and stability is trained, not inherited. Chapter 16. Respond, don't react. Reaction is fast. Response is controlled. The difference is seconds, but those seconds determine perception. In diplomatic negotiations, representatives are trained never to answer immediately when challenged publicly, not because they lack an answer, but because speed under pressure signals reactivity. A seasoned diplomat, when confronted with an accusation, will often pause, adjust posture slightly, maintain steady eye contact, then respond in measured language. Let me address that directly. The pause does two things. It interrupts emotional escalation, and it signals deliberation. Deliberation reads as power. Now think about political live pressure environments, debates, press conferences, unscripted interviews. When a journalist asks an aggressive question, inexperienced politicians snap back quickly. Their tone hardens, their words accelerate. Experienced figures slow down. They repeat the question calmly. They breathe. They choose phrasing carefully. Even if the content is similar, the pacing reframes the exchange. The public perceives steadiness as confidence. They perceive defensiveness as weakness. This is the discipline of responding instead of reacting. Daniel faces his own version of this test. In a strategy meeting, the same board member who challenged him previously speaks again. "I'm concerned this plan lacks long-term scalability." The words hit. Daniel feels the familiar spike, adrenaline rising, impulse forming. He wants to correct immediately. He almost does. Then he remembers, pause. He inhales slowly through his nose. Just one breath. His shoulders lower slightly. He looks at the board member steadily. "Can you expand on what scalability risk you're seeing?" The room shifts. Instead of defending, he invites clarification. Instead of reacting, he redirects. The board member elaborates. The concern is more nuanced than the initial statement implied. Daniel listens fully. Then he responds. "We've stress-tested for that scenario. Here's the contingency." Even tone, controlled pace, no urgency. The confrontation dissolves into discussion. After the meeting, something subtle changes. People begin waiting for Daniel's input. Interruptions decrease. His presence feels larger, not louder. Here's what most people misunderstand. Reaction seeks to protect ego. Response seeks to advance outcome. Reaction is self-focused. Response is room-focused. When you react, you center your own discomfort. When you respond, you regulate the environment. That is leadership. It is not about winning verbal battles. It is about controlling emotional temperature. Those few seconds between stimulus and speech are where authority is either built or broken. In the next chapter, we will raise the stakes. Daniel enters the boardroom test, where multiple executives, conflicting agendas, and visible pressure converge. And there, the ability to respond instead of react will determine whether he is seen as a participant or a leader.
Chapter 17. Posture before words. Before you speak, your body has already introduced you. Posture communicates faster than language. Research in body language science consistently shows that people form impressions of confidence and authority within seconds, often before a single sentence is processed. Shoulders, spine alignment, head position, and stillness send signals directly to the observer's nervous system. This is not abstract psychology. It is neurological. Mirror neurons in the brain cause people to subconsciously reflect the emotional and physical states of those around them. When someone sits upright, grounded, and still, observers tend to stabilize unconsciously. When someone fidgets, shrinks, or collapses their posture, observers register uncertainty. Your body sets the tone your voice must then reinforce. If your posture is collapsed, but your words are confident, the nervous system of the room experiences conflict. Conflict reduces credibility. Command presence begins with stillness. Feet planted, spine tall but not rigid, chin level, movements deliberate. Not theatrical, not exaggerated, controlled. Watch experienced leaders enter a room. They do not rush to their seat. They do not scatter their materials nervously. They place their notebook down slowly, sit fully back, shoulders relaxed. That stillness expands their perceived space. Daniel begins noticing his physical habits. When questioned, he used to lean forward quickly, hands moving, shoulders slightly raised. His body was signaling urgency. Now he experiments. In a leadership sync meeting, before speaking, he adjusts his posture first. Back against the chair, feet flat, hands resting calmly on the table. When a debate begins,
He resists the urge to lean in aggressively. He waits. When he speaks, his body remains steady. We need to prioritize onboarding. No hand flailing, no rapid gestures. The room responds differently. Interruptions decrease. Not because his words changed dramatically, because his physical presence signaled stability. Mirror neurons amplified it. People subconsciously matched his steadiness. Here's the deeper layer. Anxious bodies produce anxious rooms. Grounded bodies produce grounded rooms. Your nervous system broadcasts through posture before your tone ever arrives. If you want authority, you must remove unnecessary motion, excessive nodding, rapid blinking, constant shifting. Movement suggests internal agitation. Stillness suggests control, and control creates gravity. Command presence is not about dominance displays. It is about embodied calm. In the next chapter, we will examine eye contact, how long to hold it, when to break it, and how to use it to reinforce silence without creating intimidation. Because posture begins the message, but eye contact locks it in. Chapter 18. The Sentence Landing Technique. Most people weaken their authority in the final 3 words of a sentence. They trail off, they lift their tone upward, they rush the ending, and unconsciously they turn statements into questions. Authority is often decided at the landing. The sentence landing technique is simple. Finish lower, finish slower, finish still. When your tone rises at the end of a sentence, it signals uncertainty. It sounds like you are asking for agreement. When your tone settles downward slightly, it signals completion. It signals ownership. Compare. We should shift onboarding to Q1 versus we're shifting onboarding to Q1. Even subtle upward inflection reduces decisiveness. The second layer is pause layering. After you complete a sentence, do not move immediately to the next one. Let it sit. 1 beat, 2 beats. That pause reinforces certainty. It tells the room you are comfortable with what you just said. Without the pause, even strong statements feel rushed. Daniel begins practicing this deliberately. In a weekly operations meeting, tension builds around resource allocation again. He speaks. Onboarding is our highest leverage constraint. He finishes the word constraint by lowering his tone slightly. Then he stops. 1 beat. 2. He does not glance down immediately. He holds neutral eye contact. The silence is not long, but it is intentional. Someone across the table nods. Another executive leans forward slightly. Daniel continues. If we fix that, retention improves. Again, lower finish, slight pause. No verbal padding, no defensive addition. The dynamic shifts subtly. This is a smaller room, not the executive board, just cross-functional managers. But something is different. Instead of interrupting, people begin asking clarifying questions. They are engaging the idea, not challenging his delivery. After the meeting, a colleague comments casually, "You sounded very clear in there." Clear is code for controlled. The sentence landing technique creates finality, and finality builds trust. If every sentence feels unfinished, the room feels uncertain. If every sentence lands cleanly, the room feels guided. Pause layering amplifies that effect. Statement. Beat. Stillness. Then continuation. You are not filling space. You are structuring attention. This technique also prevents nervous acceleration. When you commit to landing sentences deliberately, you automatically slow your pace, and slower pace increases perceived intelligence. In the next chapter, we'll bring all these elements together in a high-pressure environment, the boardroom test that Daniel has been moving toward. Because techniques matter most when stakes are visible, and command presence must hold under scrutiny. That is where authority becomes reputation.
Chapter 19. Brutal Simplicity. When pressure rises, complexity collapses. Clarity survives. In moments of crisis, the leaders who command rooms are not the ones with the longest explanations. They are the ones who can reduce chaos into 3 sentences. There's a pattern you'll notice in high-level crisis communication. A CEO walks to the podium after a public failure, a product recall, a data breach, a financial miss. The worst version sounds like this. There were multiple variables that contributed to the situation, and we're currently assessing internal processes while evaluating cross-functional accountability structures. Dense, defensive, diffused. Now the stronger version. We made a mistake. We're fixing it. Here's what changes now. 3 sentences. Ownership, direction, action. That's brutal simplicity. It feels risky at first because intelligent people love nuance. They want context. They want precision. But in high-stakes environments, the brain under stress does not process nuance well. Stress narrows cognition. Short statements cut through that narrowing. This is where the 10-second rule comes in. If you cannot explain your position clearly in 10 seconds, you do not yet own it. 10 seconds forces compression. It eliminates fluff. It eliminates hedging. It eliminates verbal wandering. Daniel tests this privately. He takes his current strategic plan and tries to explain it in under 10 seconds. His first attempt runs long. He hears himself stacking qualifiers. He trims again. Retention drops in week 1. We're redesigning onboarding. Execution starts next quarter. 10 seconds.
Clear. Now imagine delivering that in a boardroom. No slide, no graph, just that. Brutal simplicity signals deep understanding, because only someone who fully grasps complexity can reduce it cleanly. Weak communicators hide behind complexity. Strong communicators translate complexity. There is also a psychological effect at play. When you speak simply, listeners assume there is more depth behind the statement. When you speak endlessly, listeners assume you are searching for depth. Silence plus simplicity creates perceived depth. Complexity plus speed creates perceived confusion. In Daniel's next executive session, discussion becomes tangled. Multiple departments debate priorities. Voices overlap. Arguments stretch. He waits. Then speaks. Churn starts in onboarding. Fix that first. Silence. 10 words. No paragraph. The room recalibrates around the simplicity. Someone asks for data. Now he expands, but only after anchoring the core message. That order matters. Lead with simplicity. Support with detail, not the reverse. In the next chapter, we will examine the hidden cost of intellectual display and why proving how smart you are often reduces how powerful you appear. Because clarity is not dumbing down, it is disciplined control of complexity, and discipline builds authority. Chapter 20. Speak to move, not impress. There's a subtle trap intelligent professionals fall into. They speak to display intelligence, instead of speaking to create movement. The difference is everything. When you speak to impress, your language expands, vocabulary becomes elevated, sentences become layered, concepts multiply. You feel sharp, but the room feels heavy. When you speak to move, your language compresses, The goal is not admiration. The goal is decision. Pitch compression is the discipline of reducing a complex vision into a statement that forces action. Investors see this constantly. A founder enters a pitch meeting. Version 1 sounds impressive. Our platform leverages AI-driven behavioral modeling to optimize cross-channel engagement across emerging enterprise verticals. Impressive vocabulary, minimal movement. Version 2 sounds like this. We reduce customer churn by 22% in 90 days. Clear, specific, actionable. Investors lean forward because movement begins when the outcome is obvious. Impressing is ego-driven. Moving is outcome-driven. Daniel recognizes he used to speak to prove he belonged in the room. Now he experiments with speaking to move the room. In a planning session, debate circles around multiple initiatives. Instead of outlining 5 strategic frameworks, he says, if we don't fix onboarding this quarter, churn compounds next year. Silence. Movement begins. Someone asks, what does fixing onboarding require? That question signals alignment. When you speak to move, you focus on leverage points. You strip away ornamental intelligence. You remove unnecessary depth in the first layer. You prioritize direction over decoration. This does not mean you abandon nuance. It means you sequence it. First, move the room. Second, support the move. Third, refine the details. Impressive language often stalls momentum. Clear direction accelerates it. Here is the deeper psychological layer. When you try to impress, you subtly position yourself as the center. When you try to move, you position the outcome as the center. Rooms respond better to outcome-centered language. Because leadership is not about being admired, it is about advancing collective action. Daniel feels the shift. Colleagues begin approaching him earlier in planning cycles. His ideas gain traction faster. He is no longer arguing for attention. He is directing focus. But there is one final environment left, the boardroom test. High stakes, conflicting agendas, visible pressure. Where clarity, tone, silence, posture, and emotional control must integrate fully. In the next chapter, Daniel steps into that room, and this time the outcome will define how he is perceived going forward. Because speaking to move works in small rooms, the final test determines whether it holds at the highest level. Chapter 21. Why Stories Override Resistance. Facts inform. Stories move. When you present data alone, the analytical brain activates. It evaluates. It questions. It searches for flaws. But when you tell a story, something different happens. The listener's brain begins to simulate the experience. This phenomenon is known as psychological transportation. When someone becomes absorbed in a narrative, their mental defenses lower. They are no longer debating the idea, they are experiencing it. And experience persuades more deeply than argument. Neuroscience research shows that stories activate multiple regions of the brain at once, not just language processing centers, but sensory and emotional circuits. The listener begins to feel what the characters feel. That emotional absorption overrides resistance. If you tell a team customer churn is rising due to onboarding friction, they process it analytically. If you say, last week a new customer signed up, hit 3 confusing steps in the first 15 minutes and canceled before the day ended, they visualize it. Visualization creates empathy. Empathy creates urgency. Daniel discovers this accidentally. In a meeting about retention metrics, he presents the numbers clearly. Eyes glaze slightly. Then he adds something new. Last month, one of our enterprise clients told us their team gave up during setup. They didn't even reach the core feature. The room shifts. Someone asked, "What happened exactly?" Now they are leaning in. The story made the problem human. Stories reduce abstraction. They create psychological stakes. When you combine clarity with narrative, resistance weakens. Instead of arguing about strategy, people imagine consequences. There is also a strategic advantage. Stories allow you to deliver difficult truths without triggering defensiveness. Instead of saying, "We're mishandling onboarding," Daniel says, "A new customer shouldn't need 3 emails to finish setup." Now the critique is embedded in a scenario. It feels less like accusation and more like observation. Stories also make you memorable. Rooms forget statistics quickly.
They remember narratives. A leader who anchors key decisions in short, precise stories gains persuasive leverage without increasing volume or complexity. But stories must be controlled. Short, relevant, purposeful. Not theatrical. Not rambling. A 20-second narrative can shift a room more effectively than a 10-minute explanation. The key is this: story first, conclusion second, movement third. In the next chapter, we will examine how to structure strategic stories without losing authority, and how to avoid the mistake of emotional overexposure. Because story is power, but undisciplined story becomes distraction. And in the boardroom test ahead, every word must serve the outcome.
Chapter 22. Controlled Storytelling Under Authority. Story is powerful, but uncontrolled story weakens authority. If you ramble, dramatize, or over-detail, you lose command. Controlled storytelling follows 3 rules: brevity, relevance, direction. Story compression means reducing a narrative to its essential turning point. Not the background, not every character, not every variable. Just the moment that proves the point. Instead of, over the last few months, we've seen several customers across different segments struggle with onboarding, and one in particular from the Midwest had issues with integration because their internal systems weren't aligned. Compressed version. Last week, a new enterprise client quit during onboarding. Stop. That's the hook. Then add one supporting detail. They never reached the core feature. Then close with direction. If onboarding fails, nothing else matters. 3 beats. Event, impact, conclusion. Authority remains intact because the story serves strategy. It does not replace it. Daniel prepares for his final board presentation. This is the room that matters. Senior leadership, external advisors, budget decisions. He reviews his slides. Previously, he would have opened with data. This time, he opens with a compressed story.
2 weeks ago, a new client canceled before finishing setup. They never experienced the value we're selling. That's why churn starts in onboarding. The story is brief. No dramatics, no emotional exaggeration. Just enough human context to anchor the data that follows. He transitions smoothly. Here are the numbers. Because story opens attention. Data sustains credibility. This sequence is deliberate. If you lead with raw numbers, you must fight for attention. If you lead with a controlled story, attention is already present when the numbers arrive. But discipline matters. Daniel avoids oversharing. He does not describe his frustration. He does not assign blame.
He does not stretch the narrative for sympathy. Authority remains steady because emotion remains regulated. Controlled storytelling feels composed. It signals empathy without vulnerability spillover. This balance is critical. Too little story feels cold. Too much story feels unstable. Compression keeps it sharp. As the boardroom test approaches, Daniel knows the structure. Calm posture, grounded tone, brutal simplicity, silence, compressed story, clear direction. Everything converges. In the next chapter, we enter that room fully, where perception will crystallize, and where every discipline learned so far will either hold or collapse under pressure. Chapter 23. The Boardroom. The boardroom feels different from every other room. Long table, glass walls, fewer chairs, higher stakes. This is not a brainstorming session. This is allocation, budgets, priorities, visibility. Reputation is shaped here. Daniel pauses outside the door for a brief second, not to rehearse words, to regulate. One slow inhale, one longer exhale. Shoulders settle. He enters without rushing, no hurried steps, no scattered movements. He places his notebook down carefully, sits fully back in the chair, feet grounded, posture before words. Executives filter in, quiet conversations, subtle tension in the air. The CFO opens the meeting. We need clarity on next quarter's priorities. Resources are limited. Limited. That word sharpens everything. Marketing presents first, confident, polished, ambitious projections. Product follows, technical roadmap, expansion plans. Then it's Daniel. The room shifts slightly. This is where friction exists. He stands slowly. No dramatic movement, just presence. He begins differently than before. 2 weeks ago, a new enterprise client canceled during onboarding. Pause. They never reached the core feature. Pause. That's where churn begins. Silence. No one interrupts. He advances one slide. Retention dropped 6% last quarter. 80% of that decline occurred in week 1. No rush. The CFO leans forward. What's the implication? Daniel does not speed up. If we don't fix onboarding now, churn compounds next year. Statement. Beat. Stillness. A board member speaks. Marketing argues acquisition should be the priority. Here it is. The pressure point. Daniel feels the familiar internal spike, but it is smaller now. He inhales once. We can acquire faster, he says evenly, but if customers leave in week 1, acquisition magnifies loss. Silence. He holds eye contact without staring aggressively. No defensive explanation, just grounded presence. The head of marketing pushes back. Acquisition fuels growth perception. Tension rises slightly in the room. Daniel nods once. It does. Pause. But retention fuels actual growth. Pause. And onboarding drives retention. Each sentence lands deliberately. Lower finish. Brief silence. He does not stack arguments. He does not overwhelm with complexity. Brutal simplicity. The CEO watches quietly, then asks, "What's the cost to reallocate toward onboarding?" Daniel answers in under 10 seconds.
Reassign 2 engineers, delay 1 minor feature, 30-day sprint. No excess detail. No apology. The room goes quiet again. This silence feels different. Not awkward. Evaluative. The CFO looks at the CEO. The CEO nods slightly. Make onboarding the priority. Just like that. The shift happens. Not because Daniel spoke the most. Not because he was the loudest. Because he was the most stable. Calm under pressure. Simple under complexity. Still under tension. As the meeting adjourns, something intangible lingers. He is no longer just presenting. He is shaping. In the next chapter, we'll explore what actually changed in perception and why authority is rarely declared in a single moment, but accumulated through disciplined signals over time. Because the boardroom was not the end. It was the confirmation.
Chapter 24. The Long Pause. The meeting should have ended cleanly. It almost did. As executives gathered their papers and the tension began to dissolve, one final comment landed. The senior board member, the same one who had challenged Daniel weeks earlier, spoke casually. "Let's see if this holds. We've tried similar pivots before." The sentence was neutral on the surface, but it carried weight. Doubt, history, memory of past failure. The room went quiet again. Not the structured silence Daniel had been using intentionally. This was heavier, personal. Every instinct inside him flared. Defend the plan. Remind them this is different. Protect the win. His heart rate ticked upward. For a split second, he felt the old version of himself rising, the one who would over-explain, stack evidence, prove he deserved the decision. His mouth almost opened. And then he stopped. The pause stretched. 1 second. 2. 3. Longer than comfortable. He felt exposed. Because silence in that moment meant resisting self-protection. It meant trusting everything he had already built in the room. His internal monologue was loud. If you don't answer, they'll think you're unsure. If you stay quiet, you'll lose ground. Say something strong, say something now. But underneath that noise was something steadier. You've already said enough. He inhaled slowly, then spoke, softer than before. It will hold. No justification, no paragraph. Just that. And then silence again. The board member studied him, not aggressively, evaluating. Daniel held eye contact, shoulders relaxed, no tension in his jaw. This was not defiance. It was grounded belief. The CEO nodded once. That's the expectation. The moment passed, but internally Daniel felt something shift. Not in the room, in himself. He realized the long pause was not about silence as a tactic. It was about tolerating vulnerability. In that stretch of quiet, he was not hiding behind data, not hiding behind story, not hiding behind complexity. He was standing on conviction, and conviction feels exposed. That is the emotional layer most leadership advice never addresses. Authority is not built only through technique. It is built through the willingness to be seen without scrambling. If he had rushed to defend, he would have signaled insecurity. If he had over-explained, he would have diluted the confidence he just established. Instead, he absorbed the doubt and responded minimally. The long pause tested everything: tone control, posture stability, ego restraint, emotional regulation.
It almost broke him, because the hardest silence is not between sentences. It is after you've taken a risk, when someone questions it publicly, and you must decide whether to react or remain steady. As the room emptied, the senior board member approached him briefly. "Concise today," he said, a faint half-smile. Daniel returned it. "Focused." Another small pause. "Good," the board member replied, then walked away. No applause, no dramatic praise, just acknowledgement. Sometimes authority is confirmed quietly. In the next chapter, we'll examine what actually changed, not in Daniel's skill set, but in how others now perceive him, and why perception, once shifted, tends to compound over time. Because this wasn't just a successful meeting, it was identity transformation under pressure.
Chapter 25. The One Rule Leaders Never Break. At the beginning of this journey, there was a rule leaders never break. It wasn't about vocabulary. It wasn't about charisma. It wasn't about dominance. It was this: they never let emotion speak before intention. That's the rule. Emotion is automatic. Intention is deliberate. Most people reverse the order. They feel first. They speak from that feeling. Then they try to clean it up with logic. Leaders do the opposite. They feel the spike. They pause. They decide. Then they speak. That space between emotion and speech is where authority lives. In the boardroom, when doubt surfaced, Daniel felt the spike. Cortisol rose. Ego stirred. The urge to defend appeared instantly. Old pattern, react. New discipline, regulate. He paused long enough to choose intention. What outcome do I want? Not how do I protect myself, but what moves this room forward? Intention replaced emotion. Then he spoke. It will hold. Few words, but chosen. That is the rule leaders never break. They never allow unfiltered emotion to define their first sentence. They insert silence first. Intentional silence. Not awkward silence. Not frozen silence. Controlled silence. A breath. A beat. A recalibration. Because the first sentence you speak under pressure becomes the memory people carry. If it sounds defensive, you become defensive. If it sounds sharp, you become sharp. If it sounds steady, you become steady. Perception crystallizes quickly. After the boardroom meeting, subtle changes begin appearing. Colleagues pause slightly longer before interrupting Daniel. Executives ask for his view earlier in discussions. Even in casual hallway conversations, his tone remains measured. Consistency compounds perception. Respect rarely arrives with applause. It accumulates through repeated signals of control. Daniel notices something else. He feels different internally. Less urgency to prove. Less fear of silence. More comfort with stillness. Authority is not just external perception. It is internal stability. The rule, emotion never before intention, creates that stability. Because when you control your first response, you control the trajectory of the interaction. If someone challenges you publicly and you react sharply, the entire room tightens. If you pause, regulate, and respond deliberately, the room steadies. Rooms follow the most regulated nervous system. That is leadership in its rawest form. Intentional silence before speech is not weakness, it is discipline. It signals, I am not rushed, I am not threatened, I choose my words. And when people sense that choice, they sense control. Control builds trust. Trust builds authority. Authority builds influence. In the final chapter, we will zoom out from Daniel's transformation and anchor these principles into your own life. Practical integration, daily discipline, and the long-term identity shift from speaker to leader. Because this was never just about one boardroom. It was about who you become every time you open your mouth.
Chapter 26. From Approval to Authority. At the beginning of this journey, the problem was not vocabulary. It was identity. Approval seeking sounds different than authority. You can hear it in tone. You can see it in posture. You can feel it in pacing. Approval seeking asks silently, "Do you agree? Do you like this? Am I safe here?" Authority asks something different. What moves us forward? The shift from one to the other is not cosmetic. It is neurological. Every time you over-explained in the past, your brain reinforced a pattern. Stimulus, social pressure. Response, add more words. Reward, temporary relief. That relief wired the behavior deeper. Neurons that fire together wire together. If you consistently filled silence to reduce discomfort, your brain learned silence equals threat. Talking equals safety. If you rushed your tone when challenged, your brain learned speed equals protection. These patterns are not personality, they are conditioned responses. And conditioned responses can be rewired, but rewiring requires interruption. When Daniel paused instead of over-explaining, he interrupted the old loop. Stimulus, challenge. Old response, defend immediately. New response, breathe, choose, speak. The first few times felt unnatural. His nervous system wanted the old reward, the relief of talking fast. But he tolerated the discomfort, and something subtle began changing. The silence no longer felt dangerous. The pause no longer felt like exposure. The brain recalibrated. Silence equals control. Brevity equals strength. Calm tone equals safety. That is neural pattern shift. Identity follows repetition. If you consistently behave like someone seeking approval, you become that person in perception, including your own. If you consistently behave like someone regulating emotion and speaking with intention, that identity strengthens. Daniel noticed it one afternoon in a casual team conversation.
A debate sparked quickly. Voices overlapped. He felt no urgency. He waited. Spoke once. Calm. Short. The room adjusted. He didn't think about techniques in that moment. The behaviors were integrating. That is the true transformation. When discipline becomes default. The move from approval to authority is not about becoming colder. It is about becoming centered. Approval-seeking places your emotional state in the hands of others. Authority places it back in your own regulation. When you no longer need immediate validation, your tone stabilizes naturally. When you no longer fear silence, your words gain weight. When you no longer rush to defend, your presence expands. This is psychological rewiring, not motivational hype, not surface confidence, structural change in how your nervous system interprets social pressure. And once that shift occurs, rooms respond differently. Not because you demand respect, because you signal steadiness. In the next chapter, we'll consolidate the daily practices that lock this identity in long term, so that authority is not something you perform under pressure, but something you embody consistently. Because transformation is not a moment. It is repetition until stability becomes automatic.
Chapter 27. The Leader's Internal Code. Authority is not built from techniques alone. It is built from internal rules. Unspoken standards you follow even when no one is watching. Over this journey, 5 core frameworks reshaped Daniel's communication, and they now form his internal code. Framework 1. Regulation before response. Emotion never speaks first. When pressure rises, he breathes, pauses, chooses. Reinforcement statement. I respond. I do not react. Framework 2. Scarcity of words. He compresses ideas before delivering them. He removes 25% of unnecessary language. He leads with conclusions. Reinforcement statement. Clarity over volume. Framework 3. Silence as leverage. He does not rescue others from discomfort. He holds space after decisive statements. He allows processing to happen. Reinforcement statement. I let my words land. Framework 4. Brutal simplicity. He explains complex ideas in under 10 seconds. He leads with direction, then supports with detail. Reinforcement statement. If it's clear, it moves. Framework 5. Warmth without weakness. He calibrates tone to remain steady but human. He acknowledges without surrendering authority. Reinforcement statement. Firm and grounded. These frameworks are not scripts, they are standards. When internalized, they shape identity. Daniel no longer enters meetings thinking about sounding impressive. He enters thinking about staying regulated. He no longer fears interruption. He expects it and prepares for it. He no longer fills silence. He owns it. Authority becomes predictable when discipline becomes habitual. But habits require reinforcement. Language shapes identity internally as much as externally. Commitment language matters, not vague intention, precise commitments. I will pause before answering difficult questions. I will remove verbal padding from my statements. I will finish sentences with certainty. I will allow silence to work. I will regulate my breathing before speaking under pressure. These commitments create accountability. The brain responds to repeated declarations paired with action. When you state a standard and uphold it repeatedly, self-trust builds. Self-trust stabilizes tone. Stabilized tone stabilizes rooms. This is the internal code. It is quiet. It does not require validation. It does not require performance. It operates beneath the surface. Daniel realizes something profound. Authority was never about mastering rooms. It was about mastering himself inside them. Once that internal mastery took root, the external response shifted naturally. People interrupt less when you interrupt yourself less internally. People challenge less when you stop challenging your own legitimacy. People trust more when your signals are consistent. In the final chapter, we will close the loop, not with motivation, but with a clear integration path for you. Because the difference between hearing these principles and living them is daily execution. And leaders are not defined by what they know. They are defined by what they practice consistently.
Chapter 28. Your voice is the standard. At the beginning, we confronted something uncomfortable. People decide whether to respect you in the first seconds you speak. Not because they're cruel, not because they're shallow. Because the human brain reads stability before it reads content. And if you've ever felt underestimated, talked over, overlooked, this is not random. It is signal. Not about your intelligence, not about your potential, about your delivery. Now here's the truth you need to hear clearly. Your voice is not just sound, it is positioning. For years, maybe you tried to earn respect through preparation alone. More data, more explanation, more justification. You thought if you were smart enough, clear enough, useful enough, recognition would follow. But recognition follows perception, and perception follows signals, tone, pace, silence, posture, simplicity. That's what this journey was about. Not becoming louder, not becoming colder, becoming regulated. Because the room follows the most stable nervous system in it. If you are still being underestimated, it is not a sentence, it is feedback. It means your intelligence has not yet been matched with disciplined delivery, and that is trainable. You have seen it. Daniel was not incompetent, he was uncalibrated. He over-explained, he rushed, he defended too quickly, he filled silence. And rooms read that as uncertainty. The moment he inserted intention before speech, everything shifted. Not overnight, not magically, but consistently. That's the part most people miss. Authority is not one powerful sentence. It is repeated stability under pressure. You do not need a deeper voice. You need a steadier one. You do not need aggressive confidence. You need regulated presence. You do not need more words. You need better landing. If you've ever walked out of a meeting replaying what you should have said, if you've ever felt your tone tighten under challenge, if you've ever added unnecessary words just to avoid silence, you are not flawed. You are conditioned, and conditioning can be rewritten. From today forward, hold one rule. Emotion never speaks before intention. When challenged, pause. When pressured, breathe. When tempted to over-explain, compress. When silence appears, hold. Your voice is the standard, not the room's mood, not the loudest personality, not the most aggressive tone, the standard. Because when you speak from regulation instead of reaction, something powerful happens. You stop chasing respect and start signaling it. There will still be moments of doubt. There will still be rooms that test you. There will still be comments that spike emotion. Good. That is where identity solidifies. Every pause under pressure rewires you. Every concise statement strengthens you. Every held silence expands you. You are not learning to talk like a leader. You are deciding to regulate like one. And once that decision locks in, perception follows. So here is the commitment. Not to impress, not to dominate, but to regulate, to choose, to land your words cleanly, to let silence work. If this changed the way you think about your voice, don't let it fade into theory. Practice it in the next conversation, the next meeting, the next disagreement, because authority is built in repetition. And if you've ever felt underestimated, this is where that pattern ends. Your voice is no longer noise. It is measured. It is intentional. It is steady. It is the standard. And from this point forward, you don't ask the room for permission to lead. You signal that you already do.